Well, hello everybody and welcome to another episode, and in this episode we're going to be looking at 50mm 1.4 vintage lenses. We've got a lens from Pentax, Canon FD lens, a Minolta, what is this Minolta? Rokkor PF. We've got an Olympus 50mm 1.4, we've got the Nikon AI 1.4, and we've got a newcomer, which is the Yashica ML 50mm 1.4. If you're interested in vintage lenses, a 50mm 1.4 is a really good lens to have, although they're not really going to be used today in the same way that they were when they were new. Back in the day, back in the film days, these lenses were bought for their light gathering capabilities. Film wasn't that sensitive. Most people never shot above 400 ISO. There were films that went up to about 3000 ISO, but they were very rare and they weren't on most people's radar. They were just too specialized. So the main virtue of these lenses back in the day was their extra light gathering ability. Now, however, we use them differently, or I would guess most people do anyway. If you put one of these lenses on a digital mirrorless camera, well, of course that camera is going to be far more sensitive than any film camera ever was. Digital cameras go right up to 20,000-30,000 ISO and beyond, and although they won't give you a very clean image at the very highest ISOs, you'll be able to gather as much light as you need in pretty much any situation before you need to go anywhere near those high ISOs. So these lenses are used to make a bit of the blurry stuff. So let's have a closer look at this lens. It's mounted on my A7 at the moment because I've been shooting it most of the last week and it's a very nice little thing to shoot. Let's have a closer look. So there's the Yashica ML 50mm lens. It's a beautiful thing, as all these old lenses are. It's got that great big beautiful glass element on the front there. Everything works nicely on this one. The aperture turns nicely and cleanly. There's no oil on the blades. The focus ring turns very nicely and cleanly. So it's clearly a nicely engineered, beautifully made lens. The focus throw is around about 180 degrees, which is kind of standard for one of these. It only focuses down to 0.5 of a meter. That's not quite as close as some of these lenses can go. It's more usual to have 40 or even 30 centimeters as the minimum focus distance. This one is a little bit less close. I'm not sure if this is an early version of the lens because it's got what looks to me like a pretty early serial number on it there. So maybe this is an early version, but whatever the case, it's a lovely little lens and I've very much enjoyed shooting it. It's also got quite an interesting history. It's the result of a tie-up between Pentax and Yashica in the late 70s, early 80s. And in fact, this lens is a Zeiss design. It's a Zeiss optical formula. The lenses look the same. They shoot, I would imagine, more or less the same. But the only difference is that this one doesn't have the Zeiss T coatings. Whether that's very much of a disadvantage, I really don't know, but it doesn't have those. It's got some proprietary coatings from Yashica on it. As I understand it, this lens was made by Tomioka. Now, Tomioka, as you may know, are very sought after lenses in the vintage lens world. They weren't a manufacturer that people knew the name of terribly well, but they did make a lot of third-party lenses, and some of those are really sought after. I think they made some Vivitars. I know they made a Chinon or two, and those lenses are very, very sought after today. So this lens comes from that same factory. So from the start, I would imagine we've got a quality optic here. This lens is not the sharpest in the group, and it's certainly beaten by the Canon FD lens, it's beaten by the Olympus lens, and it's beaten by the Nikon lens. The Minolta and the Pentax are roughly about the same sharpness as this one, just that is down a notch or two from the Nikon, Olympus and Canon. I think the Canon is probably the sharpest of this group. However, sharpness is only one factor in a lens. Sharpness is talked about a lot, and it's often held out as a really good thing and one of the defining qualities in buying a lens, but I don't think it's the be-all and the end-all. Remember, these are vintage lenses, and we're shooting them for their character, not really for their technical characteristics. As long as they're technically reasonable, then we really should be thinking about character, and I think that's the case with this lens. It's sharp enough. And I think you can go too sharp as well. Some modern lenses I've shot have struck me as being just too sharp. It changes the look of the image. It changes the whole aesthetic of photography. So I don't think pursuit of sharpness in itself over everything else is necessarily a good thing. There is an optimum degree of sharpness depending on the kind of shot that you want to make. Now, a wide aperture lens means that if you shoot it wide open, you're going to get plenty of that lovely blurry stuff, and we all like a bit of the blurry stuff from time to time. Generally, it's considered a very good thing if a lens can make some blur, and it is. Blur's very nice, it softens up the shot, it focuses attention on your subject, and it generally makes a beautifully feeling shot and changes your audience's emotional response to your subject. However, this one's a bit harsh. Now, I really was quite surprised by that. I know this is a Contax design. Zeiss gear has a tremendous reputation, and I thought, well, this is going to be just about as good as it gets. And I really was a little bit disappointed at first. The blur really is quite harsh, especially if your background is near-ish to your subject. It's far more harsh than really any of these other lenses, and gosh, which comes closest? I think probably the Pentax comes closest. That blur can be a little harsh in points, but I don't think it's as harsh as the Yashica. Big surprise. However, I shot the lens a little bit more and it began to grow on me. It can be soft. If the background is very distant from the subject, the lens can give soft blur, and it's a bit skittish and willful, this one. It's unpredictable. Sometimes it gives soft blur even when the background is relatively near to the subject, and it seems to have a little bit of a will of its own, actually. None of these lenses are without some harshness in the background blur. I think the softest, the nicest blur is the Minolta lens. That was a big surprise to me when I initially shot this lens a few years back, but it does give beautifully, beautifully soft blur at all distance ranges. I think it focuses fairly close as well. Let's have a look. Actually, it doesn't. It only focuses to 0.6 of a metre, which is less than the Yashica. But it certainly has very, very nice soft blur at all focal lengths, with only one or two minor harsh spots. I would say the next nicest blur for lens is the Canon FD. It's probably on a par with the Minolta, actually. I don't think there's too much difference in it. The Olympus, I think, would be next on the list. It's nice in general, but it does have a couple of harsh spots. And then we have the Pentax and the Yashica bringing up the rear on the blur test, although do bear in mind that the Yashica can be willful and a bit unpredictable. When it comes to colour, the Yashica really does well. This is a very great area of strength for this lens. In fact, I've very rarely seen colours like this. That's how nice they are. There's a special quality to these colours and to the way the lens renders them. It's bursting with colour. They're very prominent. They're unique colours. They're resonant and deep colours. Really quite extraordinary. Very special. I've written a bit like the Scimitar, and they are in fact a bit like a Scimitar colours. They also remind me of the very strong colours from the Helios 40, the Olympus 55mm f1.2, and in fact this Minolta lens. They do bear a resemblance, although the Minolta colours are different in quality. However, there's no doubt that these are very, very powerful, beautiful colours, the like of which I just haven't seen before. In addition to that, it has a little bit of glow, and I do like lenses that glow a bit. And what I mean by that is when you shoot it fully open, if you have a light source next to a dark area, the light source seems to glow a little. The light slightly spills out from the edges of the object and gives it this ethereal quality. And while that is often considered a defect in a lens, and I guess technically it is a defect, it's a really beautiful effect. It's great for everyday photography. It's good, especially good for portrait photography, because it gives a bit of that glow, a bit of that glamour, and in conjunction with this lens's slight softness, I think that makes it a really ideal lens for those kind of shots. Now, of the other lenses we've got today, I'd put this one, the Minolta f58mm, next in line for the colour prize. This lens has very deep, very resonant colours, very, very beautiful colours. Not quite the same character as the Yashica. A little bit perhaps lighter may be the best word to use, but certainly the Minolta is the next best lens for colour here. The Olympus is very nice, gives very, very nice colours. They're good and solid and resonant and powerful. They are quite conventional though. They do look quite a lot like other lenses. They don't have that specific character stamp that the Yashica and the Minolta have. The Canon produces beautiful colours, very delicate actually, very soft, lovely, delicate, beautiful colours. That's a really nice lens for colour actually, although personally I prefer the Minolta. The Pentax, well, I know that that's a very highly rated lens. I'm not that keen on it for colour actually. I do like the Pentax colours, and it does have the Pentax colour signature. The Pentax colour signature is quite restrained and unique actually. They're strong colours, but they're a little more pastel-y than the other lenses we're looking at today, and they do have a delicacy. It's a personal thing, but that's not my favourite look. The Nikon lens, the Nikon AI lens, has a very unique approach to colour. It gives rather cool shots most of the time, and I think that's something to do with the coatings that have been applied. It does have that specific Nikon colour signature that I've noticed with other Nikon lenses, and it will often turn foliage and leaves a sort of a petrol-y blue colour. It seems to push up reds and blues. I do like that Nikon colour signature. It's a really, really nice colour signature. It's very unique, very unusual. But I think I prefer the Yashica. Again, it's a personal choice. Have a look at the sample images, see which ones you like best. Does it vignette? Yeah, of course it does. All these vintage 50mm 1.4s have dark corners if you shoot them wide open, and some are worse than others. The Yashica's not too bad actually. I was quite surprised to note that the vignetting, the darkening in the corners, is somewhat less than other lenses here. The Olympus vignettes quite badly, the Pentax vignettes quite badly, also the Minolta does too. So yeah, you're always going to get some vignetting from a vintage lens, especially one with a very wide aperture. To remove that, if you don't like it, it can be quite a nice effect, but if you don't like it, stop down the lens a little bit and it will be gone, or correct it in your favourite post-production software. So should you buy a vintage 50mm 1.4? Yes, you should. Why? Well, these are versatile lenses. They've got good light gathering capabilities. They make plenty of blur if that's what you want. They're all a little bit soft wide open, some more than others, but if you stop down just by one stop to f2, that sharpness will recover and you'll have a very sharp lens. You could buy a lesser version of any of these lenses that opens up to f2 or f1.8, and that would save some money. However, those lenses are unlikely to be as sharp at f2 or f1.8 as an f1.4 lens will be, because you've already stopped the lens down one stop. Also, they're beautiful things. They were technically accomplished lenses back in the day, and if you like the mechanical aspects of photography, if you like the machinery of photography as I do, they're well worth having just for that reason. So this Pentax lens will give you beautifully delicate colours with that unique Pentax colour palette. It will give you some very nice soft background blur at certain points throughout the range, though it does have one or two harsh spots, and it's not the sharpest lens here either. The Canon FD, a very beautiful lens, perhaps giving a more modern look than the other lenses here today. It's very sharp, it's got those beautiful Canon colours, and it makes very, very soft, delightful background blur right throughout the range. Technically, this is the best lens here today. If you want the technically best vintage 50mm f1.4, get the Canon FD. The Minolta PF 58mm 1.4 is a beautiful lens. It's an older design, I think from the early 60s. It's a very heavy all metal thing. I think it's radioactive as well. But it does give the most beautiful colours, very, very striking, very, very lovely, with loads of depth and power. It's not a particularly sharp lens wide open, but if you stop it down, it will become very sharp indeed. And it gives you some very, very nice soft background blur right throughout the range. It's very, very well behaved in that respect. The Olympus Zuiko 50mm 1.4, a little like the Canon actually, might give you a more modern sort of image. Not a modern image per se, but a more modern image, a little cleaner. The blur is cleaner right throughout the range. The colours I would call more conventional. It's sort of midway on the sharpness scale between the Yashica and, say, the Nikon, which is quite a sharp lens. Again, sharpness entirely usable on the Zuiko. The Nikon is very sharp, probably the sharpest lens here today, with the possible exception of the Canon. Maybe they're about neck and neck. It has very nice background blur. It does have one or two harsh spots, certainly, but I'm going to give it a pass because it's got so few that it doesn't really matter. And it's got that very nice Nikon colour palette. That leaves the Yashica, not the sharpest lens, very, very beautiful colours, very, very peculiar background blur, seems to have a will of its own. The good news is, in terms of cost, you should be able to find all of these lenses for less than £70–80 or so, with the possible exception of the Nikon. Nikon gear does tend to be that bit more expensive because of the name. Nikon collecting is quite a big thing, and that's pushed prices up. Though you might be lucky, I have seen these at £80 on eBay. Whichever one you choose, they've all got real nice qualities, and they're all preferable to a modern lens if you want an image with character, if you want a lens that's going to produce some quirky images, images with foibles and unpredictability. So that is about it from me for today. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, ring the bell before you go, and if you like the content on this channel and you'd like to support it and help it grow and develop, you can do that at patreon.com/Zenography. As usual, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time for some more Zenography.